first I'll present the topic, and I think it's really interesting, especially as a continuation to the discussion that we had earlier. I don't know if you were here, but we were talking about SMEs and how prepared they are in terms of sustainability, and they are part of an ecosystem basically, and we all live in that ecosystem. So the topic that you two will be debating is basically how do you stress test the CE's system, you know, both financial and energy systems when it comes to climate risk. Yeah, I think it's quite clear. And so maybe you can just start with how you stress test in general and then go more specifically towards the CE region. So, Joanna, you want to start first just to present yourself and then...
So maybe a couple of words about myself. I established and run Forum Energii, which is a think tank supporting energy transition for the last actually 13 years. But also I'm part-time professor at the European University in Florence at the School of Transnational Governance, where I deal more with climate policy. And I'm also recently advising European Commissioner for Energy on some European topics. So this is about myself. And the question you ask, I think that at least in my country, but also I've been collaborating in the past with CE countries as I was the member of the government many years ago, and I remember our Visegrad meetings, CE meetings. So I remember that since the beginning, the narrative about green transition was actually not understood. So it came from the Western capitals a bit with this narrative that we need to protect climate, we need to invest, we will have green jobs. But in fact, it was something I mean, at that stage, like 15 years ago, maybe, the problems were like lack of belief that we can manage big change, lack of competences, how to implement it. And this was the reality that for years we've been doing it, a bit pushed by Brussels, but not necessarily really understanding what is the, like, renewables. But we have coal, so why we should develop renewables if they are expensive and now they are cheap, but still we want to develop them, but it's tricky. So this is my feeling that there is, but there is also research that I think that in my country also that people know that the change is inevitable because just coal goes to an end. So basically there will not be coal anymore because we started production of coal 300 years ago and it's over. So we need to replace it anyhow. So why not with the clean resources, renewables, which give us freedom because you don't need to pay for wind and solar. But how to manage this change? How to actually assure that the price will be affordable for all that? And there are also strong lobbies going into the game. We have also nuclear push now and gas and entire situation with the war just behind our border, and big struggle, which is a good one, to phase out Russian fossil fuels. So altogether, I think people are a bit lost in it. So actually calculating the climate risk is still tricky. But maybe so maybe I end here because...
Cool, thank you. So Scott Kelly, SVP at Resilience and Associate Professor at UTS. So stress testing. I've been doing stress testing for 15 years now. I did work at the Centre for Risk Studies at the University of Cambridge, and we use stress tests extensively with the insurance sector and with corporates. And they're an incredibly useful tool to understand how future scenarios might unfold over time. They are not predictions. They are internally consistent, internally coherent narratives about a particular future that are useful for informing decision-making processes. And so they become very useful in the climate space because it allows us to think about what a warmer world might look like. What does higher temperatures mean? How does that manifest as extreme weather events? What regions are impacted? how will the system-wide effects happen? What does it mean for demographic changes? What does it mean for the economy? How will it impact the business? And then so when you put all this together, you can get a coherent picture where someone can make informed decisions around how to mitigate those risks. And so it's important with stress testing as well to look at the extremes on both ends of the spectrum. So a high warming scenario and a low warming scenario. And so that's where transition risks become important in the low warming scenario, where you're looking at high carbon prices, you're looking at higher litigation risk, you're looking at asset stranding, and these costs flowing through onto businesses and onto countries. So I'll end there, but looking forward to this conversation. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you mentioned your country. Which is your country?
Poland.
It's Poland.
Sorry.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, so I didn't want to assume. So, first of all, I want to understand who decides to do a stress testing. Is it Poland that goes to someone like you and says, "Okay, can you come to us and coordinate this kind of a?" And then what if they don't like the results?
So, I mean, stress tests have been around for some time. So actually the energy sector itself, the Shell scenarios were some of the first forms of scenario analysis that were completed. They've also been used in the defense sector quite a lot to think about how a war might eventuate and what you could do to mitigate the risks for that. But I think the business community has really started using it for this business decision making. And so I spent some time working with Lloyd's of London on building one of their stress test scenarios for the insurance sector to think about how a particular type of risk, in this case it was a blackout scenario where there was a widespread blackout event across the US, might have an impact on businesses, and then therefore what would be the insurance losses to the businesses that were on their books at the time. And so these are then prescribed typically for banks or insurers to run against their portfolio, and if the stress test means that business fails or that line fails, then they need to rethink their risk capital and reallocate capital to make sure that they can withstand the type of risks that are being stressed.
Okay. So I guess, Joanna, if you try to think about it from the perspective of the citizen, not from the perspective of the business, what would this stress testing mean for the average citizen? Like, how would they understand it? Could you explain it to them?
I think that it was an interesting conversation which you have, like the previous one. I would be totally lost because I think people just do not understand complicated models, and still once you model something, and my institution also runs modeling, and we know how different the outcome is if you just put different data, and the methodology of this entire modeling is also very, it depends on many factors. So I think that generally people do not understand complex system, and they look for this confirmation bias. They don't want to feel entire anxiety about the future, so they try to rationalize it a bit. Also, I followed the development in Ukraine, by the way, where also I have many friends in Ukraine. We also actually hosted many Ukrainian friends in Poland, and I realized how dramatic the situation was for everybody at the beginning, and in a few months how everybody used to it, to the war, to the alarms which they have, and entire situation. And that's a bit, I think, the challenge, and also how to make those calculations more viable, understandable to people. And everything, in my view, or maybe not everything, but very relevant point is whether you can really create trust around your work, how you communicate, whether you invite people for consultations. The question is, because also it's not possible to work with citizens on the daily level. However, I know some organization in Poland who actually run a social contract for households process where they really selected, like, I think 200 citizens from all over Poland, really randomly. So they should be really diverse, and invited them for dialogue for a few meetings, and then people developed conclusions. So it was a really interesting process. Of course, decision makers didn't care at all. So finally, it's also your question, who runs those stress tests and who cares about it? So this is for me, I work for the government like 18 years ago, few years, and I remember that I never understood actually who makes the decisions on energy. And then I actually spent my years on trying to investigate it. And in my view, it's like a narrative which makes the decisions. And now shaped by disinformation, emotions, beliefs, social media is even more chaotic.
But if you tell me, for example, that there is a projection, a modeling that you do, and it shows that next year I might have to pay 5% more for my heating because it's getting cooler during the winter, or the other way around during the summer. Would this be a framing where average people could understand this type of stress testing of certain industries and maybe care more about it?
At an individual level, I guess it's probably not used as much, but at a business level, I think that is where it becomes quite important. So at Resilience, that's exactly what we do, and we use the IPCC climate scenarios to project forward the temperature increases, and we look across a range of different risks. So and in particular in the financial sector, these are quite important because there's a lot of hidden risks in the financial sector. For example, in the Scope 3 supply chain for companies, a lot of those emissions are hidden in the supply chain, and so you can only really get a full appreciation of the risks to a business if you have that full information. And often that information, if it's not disclosed, is not available to the financial sector, and so you need to run these scenarios and analysis to get the full picture of that. And that's just this one example. Stranded asset risks are another important part of understanding how banks' risk profile is changing based on a low transition scenario. So one estimate said that all coal-fired power stations have to be closed by 2040 in order to hit the targets. So those coal-fired power stations are on balance sheets, they've got a lifetime, and if they're closed early, then that means that business isn't going to be earning an income from those coal-fired power stations, which then impacts the loans and the financial sector that have invested in those businesses. So there's a knock-on effect that needs to be understood and calculated and estimated to understand how these contagions are going to operate within the financial system.
I want to build on the previous conversation about science, and how it's hard for people to maybe understand, and sometimes they start to not believe. And I'm wondering if it's the problem that the public communication only appears when the house is burning already. You're not prepared to what is going to happen and how it can be prevented or improved, but rather you just are put in the front of the fact that you have to close the coal plant, and that means that the price of electricity for a few years will go up.
So certainly this is the case, that the energy system is the most complicated one. So there are so many actually links that you need to understand how the energy market works, that for me it is really not easy to explain even to my mother. And even if she listen and follows my work for years. So it is really complex things, but also for me, as we actually published in the past like 200 analyses on energy system, economic, technical one, and what I hear also that they are really accessible to people, so they understand the conclusions. However, the process of editing those reports takes us really weeks, and we just go around. Of course, it's not that our aim is to make it understandable to the average citizen who actually is not interested in energy transition. Maybe somebody has some emotions around nuclear or renewables or coal, but how it interacts. And the question is it really my decision? So people actually, decision is taken when we are paying the bill, if we want it or not, and then what choice we actually have, how we can impact the decision-making process. I remember in Poland, actually, the energy transition talk started maybe 10 years ago, when there was really air pollution movement. So people really realized through the transparent data, there was monitoring in many places in Poland, and people realized how bad the air quality is actually. When I was a child, I thought it's winter smelling, but I understood after a year it's coal, which is stinking, by the way, not smell. But and it was like really big change for people. But then there were actually also, there was some research done that people started to make a pressure for 3 years. Like they were totally angry and wanted government to act. And after 3 years, they only heard there is a problem, there is a problem, there is a problem. So they really stopped listening to it. Because people don't want to listen about the problems only, they want to see what is the solution, how much I will pay for it finally, how much does it cost. And in my view, the weakest point of this, let's say, big knowledge which we have about climate and actually weak current institution is the gap in planning, and competences, which make the whole transition really available to everybody. Because the aim of the transition is not that we will pay more for electricity. We should pay actually, like I don't want to say less and less, because it's also not possible, but it's not that we cannot see the cost increase. And particularly now in Europe, when everybody talks about energy cost, and we know that we are one of the most expensive continents in the world, so it is really a challenge.
Mm. I just want to mention as well, like I totally agree with you, the energy system transition is incredibly complex, but it's also really exciting. I think it's one of the glowing lights over the last decade is how quickly renewables have reduced in price over the last decade. Looking at solar, 90% reductions over the last decade, the acceleration of wind across the world, we're seeing record investment. So if you're just looking at new investments, 2 trillion investments in renewables versus 1 trillion investment in fossil fuels, and that's predicted to go to 4 trillion by the end of this decade to 2030 for just 1 trillion in fossil fuels. So if we're going to hit our targets, the energy system has to decarbonize. That's fundamental. It's going to have to power our electric vehicles. It's going to have to power our heat pumps. It's going to have to we're electrifying society, so it has to be electricity, and I think that's a really exciting time to be on. But yes, we are going through a transition, and there are system costs that we're going to have to invest in order to make that transition, because renewables are intermittent, and we have to face up to the fact that investments are going to have to be made in new grids. They're going to have to be made in storage technologies in order to flatten out the volatility that we see there. And some innovative solutions like demand-side management and others are going to have to come into play to enable us to do this. And you know, if we look historically, governments have made these investments in the past in the grid before they've been privatized. So I think there's a strong case that during this transition, there needs to be investment. But once you've made that investment and switched over to a new distributed renewable system, it will be here to stay. And then you have a long-term lower cost system.
So I'd like to see if we have any questions from the audience. Yeah, we have one question, please.
Hello, thank you so much. This is a very interesting discussion. So you had a comment about what would make people care enough to do something about climate change. I have a follow-up question to that. What would be some good arguments to be made in the boardroom so that companies, larger companies, the large polluters, can do things about climate change, not only for adaptation, but maybe for mitigation purposes too?
So your question is about how to get the boardroom to make decisions. Yeah, brilliant. So I think there's two sides to this to answer this question. Firstly, you need to look at the risks, and I think businesses are not taking the risks properly into account. There have been several surveys that show companies know that there are physical risks, but they're not estimating nearly enough in terms of what risks are going to be facing the business and then the transition risks as well. But then looking at the upside and the opportunity that investment in decarbonisation technologies, in transitioning to more efficient, innovative, better ways of working are going to have for that business. So I think we are still at the early stages. There's inertia in the system. There needs to be some early movers to show that actually this is cost effective, it's a winnable solution, and then I think other businesses will start to follow.
So
I just probably have a question to you, which company you mean, because I don't think actually all companies are for actually investing in adaptation and resilience. So not for everybody. Everybody has a role to play, and I agree that some companies have a stronger role to play. They need to be the leaders, and they should really care, because also once they don't do it, they will pay cost for inaction, or so. But then I don't think that, each company should take the same responsibility. I think that a lot depends on decision makers, also on society, to make a pressure to act on scientists, that they will make their knowledge available to everybody. So it's shared responsibility, I would say. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I don't know if I should have the the closing remark, but I'm thinking that if companies are doing it because they want to make money or save money, maybe the population should also, be able to see that the whole point is to save money. So we're changing the energy system, and it's not going to be more expensive. It's going to be cheaper for us. It just takes a few years, and we have to invest some time and some resources. So thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you so much, Scott. Yeah, sadly the time is up, but we will continue discussing in the break after the whole thing is ended. So thank you so much.
Thank you.